What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel again. No More Wide here. As you can tell by the title, I'm starting a new series that's called the Tech Series. Basically in this playlist, I'm just going to put me showing you how to repair certain things on cars. Some of it will be, I guess performance related, maybe installing wideband O2 sensors or how to wire up a boost controller or stuff like that, how to set up your suspension correctly, a bunch of things, whatever I can think of and whatever I'm working on at the time. I will definitely show you guys how to go about installing that stuff, because not everybody knows what to do. And in this particular episode today, I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot a misfire on the BMW E30, in specific case a 1990 325i. I'm hoping we can get down to the bottom of it. However, misfires on these cars are super common, and there are plenty of things that can go wrong with these cars. Vacuum leaks, fuel pumps can die, injectors could be bad. There's just a plethora of things that can go wrong. So we'll just try and get into it. I'll try and keep it simple. I'll try and make it to where everyone can understand what it is that I'm doing. Excuse me if this video is a little long-winded. This is the first episode of this, so I don't really know how to go about it just yet, but we'll figure that out together. So let's just get right into it. Alright, here's a car that we're working with. This is a 1990 BMW 325i, also known very affectionately as the E30. If you don't know about these cars, definitely go do your research on them. These are fantastic cars. I have owned a couple of them, and seeing this one makes me want another one. This one has an M20 engine. We are having kind of drivability issues. Not really drivability issues, but it does misfire when it's at idle. And it kind of misfires when you're a little bit higher in the RPM range. It kind of just seems like it has an overall lack of power. He's done a few things to this car already. He's replaced the radiator hoses. He's replaced a few sensors already. He did the spark plugs. He did the distributor cap and rotor already, trying to track down this issue. I believe we've already replaced this intake boot, which is known to fail and crack. These cars are really temperamental. It is old. The electronics are old. The connectors are old. So trying to track down problems on old cars can be a bit of a daunting task. But if we step inside, normally you would have a check engine light when this stuff happens, but unfortunately this car has not been throwing a check engine light at all. It was at first for misfiring. Now it's not. Even though it still is misfiring, it's not throwing any codes. So all I'm going to do is try and take this step by step by using one of the most fantastic service manuals ever for BMWs, Bentley Publishers. If you don't have one of these, definitely grab one of them. And what we're going to be doing right now first is to do a fuel delivery test. Alright, so coming to the engine bay, found this relay right here. This is a fuel pump relay. What we're going to be doing is actually removing this relay, and we're going to leave the key off. Now if you look at the back of the relay closely, it'll have numbers on it. I don't know if this will really focus on it, but there are numbers on here relating to which pins are on here. So at the top we have pin 87 and we have pin 30 over here. So if you were to take this and install it like this, pin 30 and 87, those are the two pins that we need to jump together in order to get the fuel pump to run like it should. So we'll be jumping this pin right here that's closest to me, and then the pin over here on the left side. Basically I'm going to just take a wire and jump them both together, and that should run the pump. So you'll need to get yourself some kind of container. See over there I got a 2-liter crush bottle. It needs to be at least 2 quarts in volume. If you have a quart, there's a good chance it'll just run out. This is the fuel pressure regulator right here. What we're going to do is disconnect the hose off of it. I disconnected the hose, it's right here. This is the one that runs back to the tank for the fuel return. And I just went and bought a piece of hose. Cost me like $1. Bought a piece of hose, got a clamp, and I just have this hose running into that bottle over there. Now the test says to run the run the pump for 30 seconds, and you're looking for 875 milliliters of gas, or roughly around 30 ounces of gas, it says in the book. So I'm gonna go on ahead and try to run the pump and see how much fuel we get. Alright, ran the pump. As you can tell, we got a lot of gas in there. So need to find out a way to measure this. But the good thing about doing this test is it will also confirm that your fuel pump does work. And obviously I drove this car here and we know that it works, but this is a good way to definitely check if your fuel pump does work or not. So let me just try and pour this into a container and see how much fuel we got. All right, so this is going to be very crude, but as I said earlier, we're looking for 875 milliliters or about 30 ounces of gas. This spray bottle happens to be, it says, I know you can't read it, but up here it says 28 ounces or 828 milliliters. So there's a fill line up here on the very top. So basically, if we fill this up and I have just a tiny amount of gas left in there, at least I know I have around 30 ounces. Yeah, I'd say we have the right amount of fuel. Since our test turned out good, we can go on ahead and move on to the next thing to test, which would be fuel pressure. You will need a fuel pressure tester or a gauge of some sort. You can rent them at your parts store probably. I have some because I work on cars in general, so I have one already. So I'll probably just hook it up and kind of show you guys how I have it rigged up, or how you're supposed to have it set up for this particular car. This car doesn't have a Schrader valve on the fuel rail, so you have to manually hook up a few hoses and put the fuel gauge in line of those hoses so you can see what the pressure is. So if you don't get the 30 ounces of recommended fuel when you run the pump for 30 seconds, you should probably look to see if you have a kink in a line somewhere, or maybe see if your fuel filter is clogged, or better yet, just replace a fuel filter and see if the test improves. If it doesn't improve, then it's likely that your fuel pump is weak, or maybe the strainer inside of the tank is clogged and you need to just pull it out and inspect it, or maybe just replace the fuel pump. So alright, so you can see what I'm working with here on these cars. Now granted, this is a 6-cylinder, so the 4 cylinders are going to be different. So I do have the correct way to test 4 cylinders. However, I'm working on a 6-cylinder in particular, so this should work for all of these E30s with the M20 B25 engine in them, or it may work for the B27 engine as well, although those have slightly different fuel management systems, but nonetheless the fuel rails will be very similar. So as you can see, this is the we worked here a moment ago with the fuel pressure regulator. Don't mess with this hose. I just have it taken off just so I can get to the hose on the bottom that feeds the rail. So this one is the line coming up from the fuel pump. As you can see, I put in a brass T here. This is a 5/16 T. So fuel is coming up in through this one into the rail, and then it comes back out the fuel pressure regulator. But I have this teed off here, and then this line will just run straight into my fuel gauge, which is this guy right here. I'm just gonna put that straight into that hose right there. And the reason I have it so long is so that I might take this for a drive. I might be able to put this up here so I can see what the fuel pressure reading is like while I'm driving. But the test that we're going to perform now will be only certain tests that are listed here. So you can see we're going to jump the relay like we did to check the fuel delivery. So we'll pretty much be jumping the same relay that we jumped before, which would be this close pin to you and this pin over here. We're going to run that for 30 seconds, and then the pressure that we're looking for the 325Is, here's the 325Es up top. The pressure we're looking for is 3 bar of pressure, or 43.5 psi plus or minus 0.9 psi. So as long as we're within this specific range, I'm looking at the bottom number by the way, then we're good to go on ahead and move on to the next step. So alright, so I'm running the pump again for 30 seconds, and what we're looking for is 43.5 psi, or about 3 bars of pressure. As you can see, we have a leak. Alright, so as you saw there, I know it's kind of hard because the camera angle was weird, but it got up to about 48 psi, and it says in the book that it's plus or minus 0.9 psi, so technically we're over pressure, and that could be due to there being a kink in the fuel return line, which I don't believe there is, and it could also mean that the fuel pressure regulator itself is bad. But I'm actually happy that we have more pressure than less pressure. So what I'm going to actually do is continue on with the test. Now naturally I would want to just replace this fuel pressure regulator, but I think that these things are pretty expensive. Once you kind of know how to work on these things, you know, you can kind of understand what will work and what won't work. Right now I know that being at 48 pounds of pressure is probably fine, and when I start it, it should hopefully be within spec. So the next thing to do is just to reinstall this fuel relay, reinstall it back into the position it goes, and then what we're actually going to do now is start the car and let it idle and see what kind of fuel pressure we get. So according to the manual, when it's idling, we should be between 40.6 psi and 46.4 psi. That's what the pressure should be about when the car is just sitting here idling. So you probably can't see it there, but it is staying steady around, I don't know, around 3 bars of pressure. So it's within spec of what it's supposed to be, at least idling, and so that's a good sign. The next thing we want to do is to remove the vacuum line from the top of the fuel pressure regulator. There's a vacuum line right there that runs on top. If you remove it, the pressure should rise. When you put it back on, the pressure should return to what it was. All right, it rise, went back down. So that lets us know that the fuel pressure regulator is working and that the fuel pressure is correct. So we'll shut the car off. All right, so looking at our little flow chart here, I'm under cold running and warm-up drivability, and this will probably lead into actual drivability when the car is warm already. So as you can see, the first thing it says to do is to start with intake air leaks, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, he has already done some work to this car, and the first thing I told him to check for was vacuum leaks or air leaks, and we did find that this tube right here, which is super common to crack on the bottom when it gets old, he went on ahead and replaced that. And then I really don't like this thing, whatever this is in here. This probably could be a vacuum leak. But we went on ahead and looked for any blaring issues, and this one was definitely leaking. So gone ahead and got that guy replaced. He put a new vacuum hose on the fuel pressure regulator, and then he replaced a few other vacuum items as well. There are some things that are original, like this brake booster hose that could be leaking, and then also, believe it or not, the dipsticks O-rings, this one is actually really loose, so this might cause an air leak, and these things are very sensitive to air leaks, so it really messes with the fuel ratio. So I may go on ahead and replace those O-rings on that dipstick, but just trying to follow the chart. I'm going to go ahead and skip that part right now because I know he's already messed with it, and as you can see over here, it says to check hoses, connections, ductwork, oil filler cap seal, and oil dipstick seal. Now the next thing you would go to is the fuel injectors being clogged or not, and considering the amount of time I have today, I'm probably not going to mess with this. As you can already tell, I skipped straight to step C for pure fuel pressure, so we know that that is good. The next thing we're going to be checking is the airflow sensor flap, which is on these cars they have airflow meters, or AFMs, which is this contraption right here. Basically, it's not a mass airflow sensor, even though they sound similar and they don't work similarly, but they pretty much accomplish the same thing. The next thing we're going to do is to check this to make sure when the air gets sucked in, there's pretty much a door in there that is allowed to move open as the air velocity increases, and when that thing moves, it runs on a potentiometer that kind of tells this sensor, okay, this much air is coming into the engine, or not this much air is coming into the engine. So if it does get bound up due to, you know, oil being in there, or grease or grime or whatever, obviously you're going to get some faulty readings. So I'm going to go on ahead and pull this guy off and make sure that it is functioning like it should. Alright, so I've got that sensor off, completely off, and you can see it here. Now inside here, there's an airflow meter, which is this thing right here. Pretty much what you're checking is to make sure that this door right here opens freely. So this is where the air is coming in this way. It swings this door open. You just want to make sure that this thing can open up all the way completely without binding up or anything, and this one seems fine. So we're just going to go ahead and reinstall this back into the air box. Now I know this stuff, as I said earlier, may seem silly, but this is just the way you need to go about diagnosing older cars, because unlike new cars, the check engine lights aren't very accurate sometimes, and sometimes it'll lead you on a wild chase. So it's best to have some type of service manual to fix these cars. So I'm going to slap this intake back together and we'll see what else we can find. As it says in this first step, I think what I'm going to do is just try and do a real quick and dirty test to see if there's any new vacuum leaks that have arisen. I'm going to do this by basically starting the car and spraying brake cleaner around all the intake areas and see if the idle quality changes or doesn't change. So the correct way to do this would be to get a smoke machine and a smoke tester. I don't have one of those, so this is what I'm going to do right now to see if there is, in fact, another intake leak somewhere else. Well, as you can tell, sprayed some brake cleaner around. Idle quality didn't change at all whatsoever. It is misfiring, but you know what we're pretty much looking for is to see if it actually stumbles and just kind of almost wants to die. But none of that happened. So we're just moving on to the next thing down the list to look at, which I believe is the coolant temperature sensor. So here down where the coolant temperature sensor would be, it's actually located just behind my meter here, sorry. If you look down there, there is a blue coolant temperature sensor just here. Right underneath the fuel pressure regulator, there's a brown one and a blue sensor. The blue sensor is the one that is the coolant temperature sensor that is going to tell the engine or the computer how hot the coolant is. Therefore, it takes this reading to know how much fuel to provide to the engine. If you have a 325 base model or a 325E, I believe that sensor actually would be white and not blue. But basically we're looking for, it's obviously dependent on the temperature. Around me right now it's about 60 degrees outside, and I did just have this running when I was checking for the vacuum leaks. So the sensor is around 70 degrees right now or so. So according to the spec in the book, it should be between I believe 2200 and 2600 ohms of resistance. So I'm going to set my meter to the appropriate setting and we'll see what it is. Basically we're just taking both the leads, both of these leads, black and red. You'll just touch them to the both those prongs inside there. Don't have them touch each other, but touch the prongs in there and see what you get for a reading. 1.198, which is definitely well out of what it should be. This should be about 2.2 to 2.7, and as you can tell, that's way off. So it's definitely telling the engine something it shouldn't be. So I'm definitely going to get that replaced and then see if I can get a better reading for that. Alright, so I went on ahead and got a new sensor installed down there, and that was kind of a pain in the butt, but it's in there. This is the old guy right here. So from what I could see, it was out of spec. I mean, it very well could have been working, you know, depending on the temperature, because the table that's inside that book is not very accurate. It only gives you 3 temperature ranges, and one of them is operating temperature, one of them is warm up around 68 degrees or so, and the other one is when it's about 14 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which it never gets around where I live at. So I can only guess and assume based off the 68 degree guy that guy was a little off. So nonetheless, I got a new sensor in there. The sensor was 20 bucks. It wasn't too bad. And I'm not gonna start it up just yet. The last thing I wanna check before I start it back up again is the throttle switch. So these cars have a throttle switch, which is basically located underneath this boot here on the bottom of the throttle body. And what that does is it basically knows when you're not idling. So if you listen kind of carefully, you'll hear like a click, hopefully. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but basically whenever you're not idling, that switch is disengaged. Basically when you let off of the throttle, the switch engages, and that tells the ECU or the DME to, you know, go to an idle fuel table, and it'll idle like it should at some predetermined RPMs. And sometimes people adjust these throttles to try and, you know, like take up the slack of the cables, and what happens is they adjust it too much and it actually pulls it off of that switch, therefore thinking that the car is actually revving and not idling, and so they'll never be able to idle right. But I want to check it to make sure it's getting voltage from the computer, and I also want to check the resistance on it to make sure that that's right. Then after that's done, I can go ahead and start the car again and see how it works. Alright, so I got the air intake boot and stuff off, and if you look just down underneath the throttle body there, the idle switch, throttle switch is this guy right here. It's an idle or full throttle switch, so basically it'll read when you're idling, as I told you guys before, and then also if you mat the throttle all the way to the ground, it also will read it being wide open throttle. So that's the only job of this thing to do. So the first test we're going to do is to make sure that we have voltage coming to the sensor. You'll take the plug here, obviously it plugged on like this. All you want to do is set your multimeter to volts, and you can put your red prong there in the middle, and then you can touch either side of this, and what you're looking for is 5 volts, and that's the reference voltage. Alright, so basically what this next test is trying to get us to determine is to make sure that the switch itself is working when it's engaged, aka idling, or when you have it wide open. There's another side of the switch that is also supposed to tell the computer that you're at wide open throttle. So right now it is at idle and the button is pressed on the switch, so technically there should be any continuity. There's no spec, that just needs to be continuity, because obviously you could, as you know, a switch either works or it doesn't. So that's telling us that there is continuity. So if I were to sit here and open, let me see if I can get this working. So if I were to open the throttle, that should go off, as it does. Now that was terminal 2 and 18. So that is the far left terminal and the center terminal. Now what Okay, so we've now tested the coolant temperature sensor and found out that it could have been faulty, replaced that. Looked for intake leaks and I didn't find any. I also sprayed around the base seals of the injectors. Nothing changed there. So I did test the airflow meter for, you know, smooth operation to make sure it doesn't bind up or anything, and that checked out all right. This throttle or idle switch or throttle switch seems to be working like it should be. When it comes down and engages the button, there's continuity there, so I know that it actually is telling the computer that it's idling, so that should be good. Before I get into that, I'm gonna put everything back together right now and start the car up again and see if it's improved any or not with the sensor. So let me get this stuff back together, and then I'll start the car up and you guys can hear it. All right, well, as you can see or hear, the car is still misfiring. I mean, I wasn't too hopeful that that coolant sensor was going to fix everything, but we had to change it anyway just to rule it out. Plus, it was out of spec anyway, so at least we know that that's new. I did call my buddy up and I talked to him a little bit, asking about anything else that was going wrong with the car, and I didn't know before that. He said that when he's driving it, when he gets to about 4,500 RPMs or so, it just like hits a wall. It just won't rev anymore, and I didn't know that going into this. What that leads me to believe is that the crank sensor could be bad, possibly. We're going to check that next. And then maybe there's a problem with the airflow meter itself. Granted, this car is old now, you know, so I've had E30s before in the past, and the airflow meters are just, they're iffy. I mean, they're old technology and they are physically old, so there's a high chance that this one is bad, or you know, maybe it works at certain RPMs better than it does at other RPMs. But we're definitely going to check that as well to make sure that it's reading properly. So yeah, let's just I'll show you guys how to test those two things here, and then we'll just try and draw some conclusions to see what's going on with this car. That one right there would be the crank sensor connector. I already took out the dipstick so I can get to this plug, and then here's the crank sensor itself right here. This is it's a pigtail, so there's 3 terminals in there, and what we're looking for is we're going to check resistance between terminal 1, which is the yellow wire, and terminal 2, which is the black wire on the sensor side, and we're looking for a resistance of approximately 540 plus or minus 54 ohms. So it says if the sensor, it says the sensor is faulty and should be replaced, obviously if it's not within those specs. Alright, I got my meter, and what we're looking for is terminal 1 and terminal 2. So if you look just down inside of this thing here, terminal 1 is, it's probably, you probably can't see barely, there's a 1, a far right, 2, and a 3. So between terminal 1 and 2 is what we're going to be taking our resistance measurement from. And remember, we're looking for 540 plus or minus 54 ohms. So it looks like we're at 496 there, 495. So that's a difference of 45 right there. And it says we're allowed to be plus or minus 54. So that number to me is a little low. I mean, it is within spec, but I don't know, I may recommend that he replaces the sensor just to rule it out entirely to be sure. But according to this test, this sensor is good, so I'm going to leave it in there for now, and I'm going to go ahead and move on to checking the airflow meter circuit. Okay, so I never claimed to be a professional, so don't laugh at me and what you see going on here, because that's not right, but it'll work. So according to the book here, the airflow sensor is on pin 7 and 12. Now I could go out there and test this directly at the airflow meter, but I figure it's better to test it this way, because when you're doing it this way, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're testing the airflow meter, and you're also testing the wiring from the airflow meter to the DME, which by the way is located in the glove box underneath the plastic cover. There's a couple screws that hold on the plastic cover, and yeah, I'm already there already. So what you see here is I got 1 lead on pin 7, the other lead on pin 12. That's counting, you know, reading left to right on the top row. 7 there, 12 there. So basically all that this thing is saying is, and I'll zoom in on it for you so you can see, not the wires, is that it says move the sensor flap or actuate the starter, and it says resistance must fluctuate. Now I'm going to go out there and manually move it slowly with my hand. So right now it's hooked up, and you can see that we're getting this reading here. It's just setting at idle. I guess essentially this won't be idle, but this is how it's sitting right now without the engine running at all. And what I'm going to do is go out there and move it with my finger very slowly all the way to full throttle, and then I'm going to release it slowly back down to where it's shut. So ideally we're looking for a smooth transition. I am not sure if this number is going to go up or down. I imagine it's going to go higher than this right now, but I don't know how it's, you know, wired and how it works exactly. But all we're basically looking for is something that resembles a smooth linear resistance curve. We don't want to see it jumping around, like say starting at 0.6 right now it is, and it jumps to 2, and then it goes back down to 4 or something random like that. We don't want it to be like that. We want it to be nice and smooth. So I'm going to do my best to move the flaps smoothly, and then we'll come back and see what we got. Well, as we can tell by those results from the AFM readings, to me, those resistance numbers were just jumping all over the place. I know for sure I smoothly pushed the door open, and I smoothly let the door come back to being fully closed. And the numbers went up to 1.1, so it is. I assume that it starts around 0.6 as it was at rest, and then I assume it should gradually make its way up to 1.1 or 1.2 ohms of resistance there, which I did see that number. However, when I got to rest, the number was kind of just jumping around from 0.9 to 1.1, sometimes 0.8, and I wasn't even moving the door at all. It was just stuck wide open, so it should just stay at 1.1 or 1.2, but as you could tell, it was just jumping all around all over the place. So I'm going to go on ahead and recommend that he replaces that AFM meter, and that should solve his problems. At least it should be a giant step in the correct direction. So unfortunately, I don't know if you guys caught it earlier on in the video, this thing is making a knocking sound now, and I haven't even driven it at all. It's been sitting here for a couple days, and I started it up, and this sound is what the guy was telling me that he was hearing. And I didn't hear it at all when I picked this car up. Honestly, it was night. I jumped in it, started it up, drove it home, and I went inside. So I started it right now, and I heard this sound I haven't heard before, and it definitely sounded like something's going on in the bottom end, maybe a rod bearing. Unfortunately, I am not going to continue on with trying to diagnose this misfire because I don't want to keep starting the car and potentially damaging the crank more than it needs to be. So he's aware of this. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to end the series off here. I'm pretty confident that replacing the AFM would solve this misfire. As I said in the beginning of this film, these M20s tend to naturally idle pretty lumpy like. The technology is old. They are batch fired injection, meaning the computer fires cylinders 1, 2, and 3 at the same time, and then cylinder 4, 5, and 6 at the same time. So there's a high chance that maybe cylinder 1 misfires in that particular firing operation. These things don't really idle silky smooth like most people tend to think they do. I've never seen one. They've always kind of just made like a kind kind of like that. They kind of just, you know, they're steady for a little bit, and every now and again you get kind of like a miss that sounds like a dead miss, but really it's just kind of how they are. So this one though was misfiring a lot more than that, but like I said, unfortunately we're not going to be able to dive more into it because it does sound like the motor is compromised in some way. So I do know that he replaced the spark plugs, the spark plug wires, the cap and rotor, and I went on ahead and just did a quick test off camera, started the car, pulled every spark plug wire one by one, and I can definitely hear it arcing off onto the cylinder. So every time I pulled out a cylinder, or every time I pull out a wire, the car definitely did change in idle. So I'm sure that the spark side is fine. I'm pretty sure that the AFM is just old and needed to be replaced. But now that we've gotten this far, hopefully this helps you guys out in trying to diagnose the misfires for your E30, for your M20 engine in particular. If you guys like this type of a series, let me know. I can continue to do more. I do plan on doing more of these with different applications, but if it's something that you guys will watch and you like it, please let me know in the comment section below. And if this is your first time to the channel, I will be getting back into working on the Lexus here pretty soon. I do have a few things lined up for it, so just stay tuned, and we'll get into that in the next episode. Until then, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.